All right, man. I think we are. Can you hear me okay still?
Yep, I'm good.
All right, cool. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So but you're my first guest on this what'll be a video and a podcast show.
Nice.
And so yeah, this may be the last one I do. So you could be the only guest on the show, man, depending on the response. So
That's all right.
well, so for whoever's watching this, I just want to introduce Rory Breland is a buddy of mine. We go back several years. He's the broker owner of Blackstone Partners, which is a real estate brokerage as well as a property management company and a real estate holding company. If I remember correctly, I was talking to Rory right before we started. And I was like, hold on, I'll save this because I want you to talk about this. So Rory he's been in the business for 20 years. He has started in the business right around the .com sort of implosion. So I want to ask him how that affected real estate. But he started with an independent brokerage, moved on to a major brokerage, and now his own company. So Rory is just a little background. Rory is one of the most technologically savvy brokers that I've come across, and so I wanted him to share kind of some of the stuff that he's been doing since COVID started, as well as things that he would recommend to a new agent coming into the business, because there's a lot of technology disruptors in the market now with Zillow and Trulia and some of these other types of companies that are on basically online brokerages. And so Rory, again, man, if I missed anything, feel free to fill in the gaps there.
Dude, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I mean, you kind of covered in the intro there, kind of my background. So we've seen a number of things in that 20 plus years I've been doing this. For sure, the market's always going to change, but how we do business has changed. The sales cycle has changed. Lead generation has changed. Transaction management has changed. But in the end, we're still doing the same thing. We're trying to find people and place them in a property, or we're trying to market a piece of property. Over that time, I've kind of moved through from residential into commercial and property management and other things. So it's a bit broad. But yeah, without a doubt, COVID has certainly had an impact on that, and will be remembered as one of those major disruptors, certainly in my career and for a lot of people that are out there now.
Man, I think for every business, it's unbelievable, and I think it's just starting to. I think we're just starting to really feel the kind of the impact of it, and how it's going to affect business going forward. I think there's still a lot to come, but I forgot to mention too, Rory is also a real estate self-defense practitioner in the martial art of Krav Maga. So are you a black belt yet?
I'm a brown belt. I'm a brown
belt. How long you been training that for?
I guess, I don't know, several years now, 6, 7 years. I'm not sure now, but yeah, it's become a major part of my stress relief. I do a little bit of instruction and just kind of do a lot of independent training now. Just kind of when you reach a certain point, that's what you do: hook up with a few people and
beat them up.
And beat them up and get beat up.
Yeah, man. So Rory probably wouldn't mention this, but he's when I say he's a very progressive real estate agent, he actually has a dojo on his carport. I think it's called the dojo. Isn't that right?
It is. It's that's mostly because I live in a home with daughters that have run me out of my house, and so it was my last place of refuge.
So it's your man cave.
That's right.
I get it, man. I'm learning quickly. So, well, let's jump in. I got a few questions for you, and just kind of want to see where it goes. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was how has your business changed since COVID? I know I saw people that real estate agents that I know online that were doing tours. If they could do a property tour, they were doing it with masks. For a while you couldn't even do it because people were scared. I saw closings happening on the hood of vehicles outside. I mean, it's very interesting. So how has it kind of changed for you since COVID started?
Yeah, we didn't know when it began exactly how long it would last, and so we think of it being something that would be for a weekend. So there were a lot of procedures that were spur of the moment: closing, showings, rubber gloves, masks, hand sanitizer, and so forth. But now that it's been here the length of time, you're starting to see people adapt to that and adopting more kind of long-term policies there. So in terms of showing, I had agents and I had clients that did not want to meet, and so we can't just stop working. So what I recommended to all of our agents and what we did is I said, let's come up with a policy that we're comfortable with. And early on, there was a lot of unknowns, so we took more precautions than we do now. But anytime we scheduled a showing, it was, I'm going to show up to the property before you. I'm going to unlock the door. I'm going to turn on the lights. I'll be wearing a mask and gloves. I'm going to go back outside or wait in my vehicle. You're welcome to tour the property. When we're done, we will not shake hands or anything else, but we'll communicate via email or phone after that. And that was very early. We weren't quite sure exactly what to expect from COVID. And so now some of that has relaxed a bit. We know the disease a little bit more. And so we're now, we still have agents and clients that want to wear a mask and so forth. So we're just following CDC guidelines at this point, practicing social distancing, wiping down surfaces, and trying to impact the place as little as possible. If someone has 3 children and a husband and wife, and they show up at a property, it may not be necessary for all of them to walk through the home. So, for lack of a better term, Josh, I think we've just gotten more efficient. A showing doesn't last as long as it used to. You don't have as many people getting out of the car to go to the showing. And if someone is looking at 15 homes, they're more likely to narrow down before actually arriving at the house. So maybe they go from 15 to 5 and go walk through 2. So I honestly, I hate that it's for the reason of avoiding COVID, but I welcome the efficiency because our business has gotten, over the years, the sales cycle has gotten very long. And I feel that the time frame from engaging with a client to actually closing a transaction with the client has really gotten spread out, largely because of technology, and they're online or on their phone, able to shop just constantly and way ahead of when they're actually going to be making a buying or selling decision. That's where lead generation happens. You find them when they start, and it had really gotten just to a long period of time, and that's difficult. If you're trying to track those, if you're trying to manage those leads to a point of a transaction, and it can get exhausting doing that. So again, I hate that it's for this reason, but I certainly welcome the efficiency that it has forced us to bring to the transaction and for the client as well.
Wow, I didn't even realize. So you guys were when you would show a property initially, you would show up in gloves and a mask, unlock the property, and go sit back in your car and just let them walk through it.
Yeah, I actually, and again, you don't know where people are and how seriously they're taking it. And just, I'll use my personal example. Some of the group that seems to be most affected by COVID. So people with underlying conditions, elderly people. I have people in my family I'm in direct contact with, and I didn't want to take a risk of bringing something to them that could be as deadly as COVID turned out to be. So I thought, I'm going to err on the side of caution. And so now, again, I think we understand it a little bit more, and so we've relaxed some of that. But yes, early on, if someone felt strongly enough they wanted to get out and go see a property, we just simply told them ahead of time, this is how it will go. Do you have any problem with that? And you know what? The truth is that I didn't once have someone want me to change what I was doing. Either because they wanted me to be comfortable and taking that precaution, or they were equally as concerned about it. So it actually worked out well, which was very, it was very eye-opening to see that what might ordinarily take 30 or 40 minutes and be much more involved, we were able to trim that down. So again, that efficiency seemed to be the standout thing to me, that we were able to do and handle business that way. And the same was with closing. You mentioned that closing a transaction on the hood of a car, and we did. It actually started out lasting way longer because of splitting groups up. They didn't want us in the same room together, and so the attorneys having to go through documents a bit slower because of some distance, sliding documents across the table, but then also because of different groups. So I'm getting up from the end of the table and walking to the other end of the table and transferring documents and so forth. So the first few transactions that we did, they seemed longer and just more cumbersome, but they've adapted at this point for the most part, and this is, I'll say it's starting to feel normal again, in that transactions are happening without a lot of I guess interruption to them and things that people aren't comfortable with. Nothing new at this point.
Yeah. So you feel like you feel like people initially when it started, were a lot more patient with the process being more specific and more, I guess, stringent.
Yeah.
I mean, did you see that? Because
Yeah.
I felt like everywhere but the grocery store line and the roads, people were really patient with how everything needed to go. In my experience, grocery store line was, I mean, a riot could be incited in seconds over, a carton of eggs. But other than that, I felt like everybody was pretty cautious and understanding.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. There's a bit of fatigue that has set in with regards to complying with CDC guidelines, and so you're starting to sense some of that at the grocery store and with clients, but there's still a place for us to do business and to do so safely. And at this point, it's really not having a negative impact on things that I can tell. That being said, I would imagine that there is still an audience of people who completely set aside the buying process or the selling process, either because of their being more comfortable without someone coming into their home. So imagine someone still occupying a home that was going to put it up for sale, and maybe they are part of that group that's more susceptible to COVID, or they have someone in the home who has underlying conditions that could certainly see they could certainly see the impact of COVID on that particular home because of the occupants in it. And so and so those people might say, hey, well, we're not going to market our home right now because we don't want that unknown coming into our house. We want to be safe. So there's some inventory that is sitting on the sidelines, and at the same time you have buyers in that exact same group. So I feel that that's going to create a bit of a kind of a backlog of some clients and some inventory that will show up at some point, either when they personally become comfortable, the CDC guidelines are more fully relaxed, or we just become so adapted to a new normal of whatever it is, and the precautions that you take, and they say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, and it's not going to go back to how it was. This is the normal, and so they now step out and engage in buying a house or selling a property and so forth.
Yeah, we were in that position. I think I told you when we talked last week that we were going to list ours for sale, and then COVID happened, and I didn't want anybody. I didn't feel comfortable with people. I mean, I have a daughter that's a little over a year and a half, and I'm not worried about me. My understanding was that younger children, it affected even less than people our age. But my mother is in her late 60s. My dad is in his early 70s. My mom has had some respiratory issues in the past. It was like I didn't know I wasn't as worried about me as I was about them. So we just were like, well, we're just going to hold off. I don't want people coming in the house that I don't know. And I think we're going to end up, we're going to rent it now, and keeping it. But it's, it's funny. I told you about this too when we talked. I was looking online at different properties on the Realtor app, and when the Fed dropped the rates this most recent time, all of a sudden it's like within a week, every property went pending. So I think you're right. I think there seems to be some pent up demand and maybe some houses sitting on the sidelines because it looked like everything went under contract within a period of days after that last rate drop. So that's interesting.
Yeah, something that happened to us when we first kind of just learned of COVID and its impact on the market. All of our vacant properties went under contract, and and we had several of our occupied properties that were withdrawn from the market. So imagine inventory out there that is X number of homes for sale, and all of a sudden, people who are looking at a list of maybe a dozen homes immediately went through and said, "Well, I don't want to go in the occupied house," so they eliminate those from their list. And I had several properties that both homes for sale. I had some managed properties that were available for lease. All of them, when our shelves were cleared pretty quickly. And in talking with other agents, they experienced much of the same thing. So you had an immediate reduction in inventory from people pulling their house off the market, and then you had an immediate reduction, kind of that efficiency in shoppers, and then throw some cheap financing in there, and it was a perfect little storm. So
it's a land grab.
All of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, it started happening. I thought, what on earth is going on? But that's what it was. At least that's what we were able to tell from it.
Well, and part of the thing too was, if we listed a house for sale, in the beginning of stages of COVID, I didn't think anybody would want to come look at it. And we didn't want it sitting there for 30 or 60 days with no activity. And then all of a sudden somebody's like, well, you gotta be prepared to take 20% less because it's been sitting, which is how I would, look at a negotiation. If a property's been sitting, then, you would think that the sellers would be more negotiable, and we don't want that happening. So that was, I would imagine, another, effect of all of this.
Yeah. That I would agree.
Well, I know you've done some. I know you were telling me you did some recorded training for agents. So on that front, certainly you're one of the more progressive agents and or brokers in doing agent training. I don't know many other brokers, none that I've talked to, that have recorded agent training that you've created. But that kind of leads into my question. My next question is, for somebody coming into the business, a new agent coming into the business, what do you recommend for them to be successful? Like, what is not necessarily the quickest path, but do you see as an effective path to become successful in the business?
Right. That's a good question. I ask myself that question quite a bit when I bring in new agents. So the word I'll use is durability. So it's not the fastest, and it may not even be the highest producing, but just my experience is that durability, the ability to stay in the business, is key. And a lot of people get into and out of the business. And I do feel that on training, so many brokerages and individuals, they just go to a third party. There somewhere is someone who's an experienced trainer, and they bring in this outside source for training. And we did some of that. I personally used quite a bit of third party training to develop my business, but I wanted my agents to be more durable, and I personally wanted to be. And that's my advice to someone getting into the business is be able to stay. And so for me, that is actually being able to shift when the entire market or the entire agent force seems to go left. I'll quite often will want to go right. And I think that the way that I promote or try and teach durability is to find the place where it's easier to win, as opposed to competing with the majority of agents. That's, in a nutshell, that's it. So if the main thing that agents are doing for lead generation, for follow-up, for marketing, whatever it is, if everybody is doing that, And there's so many people that are very good at it. And there's always a new crop of agents coming in and a new group of trainers, but they're all kind of doing the same thing. And so it's more difficult to stand out. So a brand new agent stepping into that environment, ask yourself the very logical question: why on earth would a person choose to do business with you, the brand new person who just got a license, who hasn't really sold a lot or represented a lot or has a ton of experience? Why would someone choose you over someone who maybe has been doing this for 10 years, has done 100 or whatever number of millions of dollars of transactions, has a team of people involved? So what can you do to win if that's what you're competing with? And so my answer to that is learn how to do things and learn areas of the business that, number one, diversify you so you're not just doing a single thing. So for me, that is, if you're a new agent and you plan on, let's say, becoming a residential agent, also learn something about commercial business, learn about leasing, learn about property management, even to the point of just being able to speak about it, learn about investments. And so you will find that there is a full-blown business waiting for you in each one of those areas. And I think diversifying is what creates that durability. So if the majority of agents seem to be slowing down because a change in interest rates, a change in markets, or some of the disruptors that we've mentioned, they're going to have to either recreate themselves or wait for the market to change back to where it's favorable so that their way of doing business can be done again. Well, I can't wait for that. So I want to immediately shift and do something else that my license allows me to do. And so for us, that is how property management or doing investments has come to be. And I've had many years where I looked up and said, our forecast for this year is that the market is going to change this way or that way, which means I can either compete with every other agent and chase after that same business, or I can go the complete opposite direction and focus on something none of them are focusing on. So the training that I do is really designed to teach that, to identify that, to know those places you can go, and to create a durability within your business so that you can stay in it.
Yeah, I like the idea. I like what you said about basically when everybody's going this way, go the opposite way. I feel like that always that is always an advantage. That seems to work really well a lot of the times. I know one of the times we talked, you told me, this has been a while, but you told me that you had an agent where you would have a property, somebody wanted to see a property for rent, and you had trouble getting people to agents to go show it. And you were like, man, I mean, you can go out and for a couple of hours of work on the weekend, make $1,500 or $2,000, and then have a potential client a year later when that person wants to move. And I know everybody kind of, I mean, I spend some time in commercial real estate, and I know everybody wants to do the big deals. Yeah. But a lot of the agents I found that were the most successful were the ones that consistently did those smaller deals. And then when you hit it out of the park on a big deal, then you really are, have a significant uptick in your income or in these big bumps in, but you have kind of the, and on the commercial side, it's doing leasing as well. Leasing properties where you may not make that much on the deal, but it's something that, ultimately that person that you're doing the leasing for is going to want to move and buy a building, or they're going to want to, if you're representing the landlord, they're going to want to sell the building, or something like that. And so it ultimately leads to maybe a few years down the road, but leads to bigger deals. So I think that's a great idea. That's so unique too, because I've never talked to another broker in our market that is pushing that. I'm sure there are some, but that seems to be a pretty unique to you guys strategy.
Yeah. In fact, specifically the training that we were referring to earlier, it's designed around that. To me, it's the best kept secret in the business. If I were to look for a single lead source to funnel to all of those different types of business that we mentioned earlier that helps you diversify, upper end residential leasing is it, without a doubt. I can go through 20 years of transactions and hundreds and hundreds of deals and clients, and I can trace more transactions to high-end residential property management and leasing than any other thing. And the reason for that, the reason that we did it is, first off, is that it creates a tenant profile of my ideal client. So my ideal client, is most likely a business owner. They're of a certain economic level. They make a certain income, operate one or more businesses. They have an investor mindset. They understand cash flows. And so that's what we do. And it's very interesting that a lot of those people actually rent homes. They do that because they open a new location, in town. They do that because they save some of their available equity or lending capabilities for that business.
Right.
And and so they understand exactly what we're doing. And if you were to step into property management for just a second, by the way, we discovered this totally by accident. I would love to tell you it was by design, but it just was not. If I said, hey, you want to be a property owner and an investor, most people look to the property first. They try and find a deal. They try and find something that seems to be can be bought cheap, or they know they can rent it for a strong amount and make a cash flow. It is usually the deal or the income or potential income that generates interest for that investor. And then they go and rent it out to whoever wants to rent that property. So you see a house that's available for a cheap price. Well, I could buy that and make a good investment, make a good rental out of it. Maybe so. Or you see a property, then you can rent it for X number of dollars and cash flow it really well. And so you buy it. And this is how most investors are born. They come into the business in the role of an investor based on the deal. What I would propose is that it's better to think of your ideal tenant. Start with a tenant profile in mind. Is this person, one paycheck away from one missed paycheck away from not being able to pay their rent? Are they salaried employees? Are they two-income households? There's a lot of things there you could come up with. But chances are you would come up with someone who probably prepays their rent, pays it online, has come from home ownership before, so they understand what goes along with maintaining a property. So you just paint the picture. Now that you have a picture of that ideal tenant, go buy the house they want. And that is a reverse of the formula for investing. For doing that, we found that group of people, not only are fantastic renters, take better care of the property, but they also fill our funnel for future purchases of a home. Many of them came from home ownership and they go right back into it. So we sell a lot of houses to those. We've gone so far as to take those people and to turn them into investors. And like I said, they're also business owners. So we help them find their commercial space. And I have commercial agents who ask me all the time when I'm going and showing a property, they say, where did you find this person from? And it blows their mind that they came to us as a residential lease. Wow. And we just develop them. So it's I call it being all things to some people. A little side note, as we're here going through COVID, and we're not a massive property manager. We don't do any apartments. We do just single family homes, but we cater to this group of people. The total number of defaults that we have had, here we are at the 1st of July, since COVID began, in terms of rent collection, is 0.
So it sounds like you've kind of niched down your property management to focus on a specific group of tenants that I would imagine are much easier to manage, just from a just a landlording capacity and a property management capacity. I would imagine you just have, if they're coming from home ownership and that sort of thing, then they kind of know the routine, and I would imagine that makes y'all's life a lot easier. And you're probably, if you're dealing with, I know you said, I want to ask you, because you said upper end residential property management and leases, I want to kind of ask you what you mean by upper end, like specifically, like I know it's going to vary by market. If somebody's watching this, in New York, I'm sure it's a lot different. But what is the price range in terms of rent, monthly rent, for when you say upper end? Like, give me like a ballpark of what that is.
Yeah, our median rent right now is $1,900 a month, and honestly, it's only there because we're still carrying a few $1,500 and $1,600 properties from things that have been on our books for years. The majority of our stuff is over $2,000, which, you're right, in some markets that sounds, oh my gosh, how cheap that is. And in other places, I think how ridiculous that is. But it's simple math, Josh. If you manage 50 $2,000 properties, it's $100,000 of rent, right? It's $100,000 of rent per month. And so you charge your rate to that. And managing 50 properties is, I won't call it a one-person operation, but it's very minimal. And if you have the right systems in place for rent collection, maintenance notifications, the assignment of vendors to those repairs, and paying of property owners, it's just not a lot to manage. Now contrast that to if I handle $500 per door multifamily units, I now need 400 of them, or 200 of them, excuse me. And that takes more people. So now my overhead is higher, my frequency of turnover, my number of work orders, everything changes. So selfishly, this was all designed to be easier and to be more efficient and to cater to a clientele that we felt could further feed our business, which it does. Right. That is all you need. That's it.
So in other words, you could have double the amount of management time with the same revenue if you were looking at the $500 per door apartment complex. Yeah.
If not,
and probably a lot more headaches with tenant turnover and that sort of thing too, and rent defaults, and I would imagine so.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, you got to think of a more efficient workload, a business that you can create systems for it easier, and it fuels your business. So I take those leads, and believe it or not, in our market, a $2,000 per month residential lease, that individual calls another real estate agent. They have a difficult time getting a phone call back because, just as you said, those agents want the big deals. And if they knew, and this is true, if they knew that 1 out of every 10 of those for us within 12 months buys a house, and if they're paying $2,000 a month, they buy $400,000 and up homes. You simply need
that was going to be my next question. Was what price range does that tenant then become a buyer in?
Yeah.
So you actually end up working a bigger deal a year later than you would have otherwise done if you had just focused on the $200,000 sale.
Sure. Exactly. And so, that's I think that's the best kept secret in the business. And here's another thing: when that person calls you and you phone them back, they are not asking for your real estate resume. They're not comparing you to another larger brokerage. They're not worried about what the name of your brokerage is or who your team is. They're glad you called them back. And so the loyalty that you develop there, it's fantastic, because you're the person who showed up when they were just arriving in town and needed help and couldn't get anyone to call them. So in our business, I think there is a problem with customer loyalty. And it's not that they don't like their agent, it's that there is a massive amount of, they're bombarded with, lead generation, whether it's through social media. There's so many ways out there for someone to go after them that it's easy to lose a client. And you tend to take it personally because you think, well, they don't remember how great I was when I helped them buy a home 3 or 4 years ago. But they know other people that get into the business, and it's easy. It's really easy to lose a client. But the loyalty that you develop with someone because you helped them when no one else would even return their phone call and didn't think I'm worthy of being a client is how I have the number of clients that I do. They remember exactly that. So
So in that instance, theoretically, an agent, let's say it's a $2,000 a month lease. So an agent could basically spend a day or a weekend showing that property, showing that client properties. And then what's the typical commission on a lease like that? Is it the first month or is it half of the first month? What is it usually?
Yeah, so there's a pretty wide range there. And I'll be honest with you, we're not looking to that for just the commission dollars. We're looking at it for the contacts, because
Right.
I can feed an agent, 20 or 30 people every month in a $2,000 per month price range, just based on leads that have come in to us. And having an agent who's not even from here, add that up over the course of a year, they'll easily have 200 or 300 people that not only maybe they made clients from them, but they have a database, and that database is going to be, how they'll fuel their business going forward. Answer your question. Maybe it's $500, maybe it's $1,500. It's going to range in there in that kind of that $2,000 realm. But here's the real value in it. And this is what I train my agents to do. If you have 10 people looking for a $2,000 a month home, you can make commission dollars by going and showing them multiple homes, hopefully find the right one and placing them in it. But where else can you make commissions from that? Here's another very, very poorly pursued group of people: for rent by owners. This is probably one of the smallest groups of people out there that agents tend to pursue. They'll chase a for sale by owner. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you drive through a neighborhood of homes and you see a red for rent sign out in front of it, what do you know? I know that that's likely an investor. I know that I have a highly qualified tenant pool because I have them in tow, and I give myself good reason for a phone call. But the other thing that you learn is that that individual likely has other property. That individual likely might be interested in another good investment if it came around. And it makes for some of the easiest contacts that we have. I can train an agent on calling a for sale by owner or an expired listing, or one of the things that's very popular within the sales community, along with 100 other agents doing that exact same thing that day, and just be lost in the crowd. Or I can call someone that is a for rent by owner, and it goes like this. I see your home that's available for lease on 123 Redbud Street over there, and I have a number of tenants that I'm trying to place in this price range, highly qualified. We actually can pre-screen them for you at no cost to you. Are you interested in me showing this home to them? You can get a yes or a no there. Absolutely. I'm anxious to rent my property. And how much do you charge? Well, we train people on how to answer all those questions. But let's say that they say no to that. Oh, okay. Well, do you happen to have any other properties out there that I could show them to? You start to learn exactly what their investments are. Another thing that you learn is, well, I'm not interested in you renting this property out, but what about if I had another transaction? We have a list of investors in our office that we keep on a preferred list. And when we find good opportunities, we like to share those opportunities with them. Would you be interested in joining that list? And in the event something comes up, would you want me to contact you? Maybe it's a house on the street. Maybe it's a house in this neighborhood. And maybe it's just another good deal somewhere. But I like to think that I can cater to an investor more so than other agents. Obviously, you see I have tenants, and I'm contacting you with this here. So would you like to be part of that investor client list of ours? Maybe they say yes. And it's easy. It's easier, and no one's calling them and asking them this. They probably get some phone calls saying, are you interested in selling the house? But they're not getting hit by 100 real estate agents trying to either bring them good deals, bring them good tenants, and to learn anything about them and their investment strategies. And sometimes you just stop talking and let them talk. And tell me about your investment strategies. Maybe I can help you find something that suits it. It's very valuable.
So because I would imagine if you put a for sale by owner sign in your yard, or put it on, listed on Zillow for sale by owner, I would imagine they're getting hundreds of calls from agents. So you go from a competition pool of hundreds to a competition pool of maybe one or two.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant, man.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. How hard is it to get your agents to get new agents to think like that?
Well, there's a difference in an agent that comes from the traditional real estate model. I have a hard time getting them to do that. I think they get into the business based on maybe other people that they knew in the business and wanting to do that big deal. And so when I teach them this, I've had trouble with them understanding, well, this is how I'm going to generate business. And that's not what I thought. And they don't adopt it as well. What I have found is that people who come from other business or other sales backgrounds, but not necessarily real estate, this makes total sense to them. And so if I tell them all you need is 5 people that are investors, 5, you will probably find individuals that have more than one property. You could probably create, 10, 12, 15 properties, listings potentially that those people own. You could probably generate 1 transaction a year of a new investment for each one of those 5 people. And that is not even considering the tenant pool that comes in pursuing those vacant properties that you now start to put up for lease. And all you need is 5 of those people. And you can actually have laid out before the beginning of a year a number of transactions ready to go, or that you're confident are going to happen because you pursued that person. If I call for sale by owners and expireds, I'm going to dig through a lot of people, through a lot of competition, and it's still to secure a single transaction. Maybe they refer some business to me, which is the typical model that's trained that people are trained on. This is significantly more valuable, and it's a little easier to think of in terms of an agent. Hey, you can just pick up 5 or 10 people this year that are investors that fit this profile, teach them what we do, learn their needs and their strategies. And if you can repeat that every year, that's where that durability comes from. So
I would imagine that's one of that's a big advantage of joining a smaller brokerage with a property management component, is that you already have that tenant. So like an agent could basically spend a few weeks going out and looking for lease by owners to try to develop that pool of investors that then you already have tenants to fill those properties. So whereas, a big name brokerage, their property management arm, if they have one, is probably a totally separate company,
right,
where you wouldn't even know those people or have access to that tenant pool as an agent anyway.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine that's a big advantage of a company, an independent that also does property management, as opposed to one of the bigger brokerages. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So the new agent coming in needs to learn how this works and why it works. And there's a lot behind it. We do a lot of training on why would someone want to rent a property in that price range? Why would an investor want to invest in this price range? Why would you want to manage property or rely on those leasing fees? And quite frankly, it's just math. It's just statistics that we've come up with and are able to analyze from the years that we've been doing it, and it just makes sense. But yeah,
it sounds like it's patience on the part of the new agent too, because most people that come to the business, it's like you've got to start. You want to start making money and doing deals right away. This approach requires a little more patience, but the long-term business, it sounds like, is more, like you said, durable. It's more sustainable if you do it like this.
Yeah, you have to have a business mindset to really set in and have the patience to do it. If you're trying to replace an immediate income, maybe you had a salary job somewhere and you need X number of dollars immediately, it's a challenge. It's not designed for that. It is designed for someone who has a business mindset that says, I'm going to start and work and build. And at a certain point, I'm not going to have to work as much, and it can still build. And, the closest thing I related to is the insurance business. I think the insurance business operates that way. You know, you can have initial first year commissions, or you can have residuals, you can have renewals, and ultimately, I have a high confidence in that type of structure, and also I think it does add to the durability, so that if I have slow times, I can move from sales to maybe commercial leasing, or I can move to my residential tenant pool. Someone's always doing something, but I have to be prepared to move to where they are. So I think that's the secret for a new agent. For sure, I know agents who got in the business and did a fantastic large production, and they're not in the business anymore. They do something else now. You know, the way they did it changed, their clientele. And so I think if you're going to be in this business, having multiple ways of achieving that commission dollars is going to be key.
Do you think one of the worst things that can happen to a new agent is to come in and do like a $400,000 or $500,000 deal right off the bat from a friend or something, that's like you didn't really have to develop that customer? They were just knew you, and so they work with you, because then you're not going to want to chase any of these lease deals that take a year to develop. I wouldn't imagine when you get when you get 3% or 6% of a $500,000 deal, you're only going to want to pursue that, I would imagine.
Well, so I won't say that it's the worst thing. It could certainly have a negative impact on someone's future and how their outlook on the business. But on the other side of it is that if they understand that this person didn't choose you because of how good you were, you use an example of a friend or maybe a family member who said, "Hey, I know you're licensed now, can you come help me?" That may also create the ability to stay in the business, whereas someone else who needs that more immediate income can't be patient. And I've had this happen. I've had an agent say, "I understand, I get it, and I see it working, but I need to make more money. I can't wait." And so someone who maybe knocks down a couple of good transactions early on from some immediate friend or family member, as long as they understand that, hey, you want to keep doing that business, then this is what you're going to have to do, and they're going to jump in there and compete in the pond with sharks and everything else that's in it. Or I'm going to have to be patient, but it may give them the ability to stay. You know, you don't know the financial situation for everybody that gets into the business. But yeah, it could certainly spoil you at the same time. And that happened. I've had people, I've been at brokerages where someone walked in the door, and I've been there for several years, and someone walked in the door and just lit it up. And I thought, wow, what's wrong with me? And 2 years later, they do something.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Else. So that can happen, yeah.
Yeah, we had an agent on the commercial side one time that they came into the business, and like a $1 million deal like fell in their lap within the first 3 months. And one of the other agents that had been there for several years was like, I kept telling her, like, don't get used to this. This is not normal. And that person's out of the business now. I mean, was out of the business within a few years. I mean, it's like, once you do a $1 million deal, you get a $30,000 commission. It's like, I'm only chasing $1 million deals. Well, the problem is everybody's chasing $1 million deals.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people with a lot more experience than you chasing those deals too. So
exactly.
So let me ask you this, because one of the questions I had for you was about investment opportunities that you see in the market. Do you like those higher end residential leases as an investor, like the 2,000, the maybe a $300,000 to $500,000 house and do a $2,000 to $3,000 a month lease? Do you like those as investments?
Yeah, so I go back to that ideal tenant. And so for us, that ends up being a 4-bedroom, 2 or 3 bath house, probably that's less than 15 years old. It could be older if it had some updates to it. But probably is in that 250 to, I'm gonna say 350 price range. As an investment, on the surface, it does not make sense for some investors who typically look at just cap rates and look at return on investment. No, they have their way of calculating things. I think most people look at gross rent multipliers and some of these other ways of coming up with how well an investment performs. As an investment to us, they perform very well for a few reasons. One, they do cater to that ideal tenant. Number two, for being newer, you've mitigated loss. So things don't break as much. So if you can imagine that you can rent a property for $2,000 a month and it's 3 years old versus, maybe a larger home that's 30 years old that rents for the same amount, and it's bought cheaper because you can buy that home cheaper. But how old is the equipment? How old is the HVAC? How old is the roof? How old are the appliances? Is there a big tree that drops limbs on the house? When you change to the investor mindset, the reality is that we want a tenant who pays on time, maybe even early, has minimal issues at the home, and anything that does happen at the home can be easily repaired. And also, the number one eroder of performance of any property that I've ever come across is vacancy. When it goes vacant, I need a group of people who want it. It should not be so unique or in such a way that I have turnover frequently and I have vacancy ongoing. There's no bigger number that negatively impacts the performance than vacancy. So that's not always what appears to be the best deal out there on the surface. And like I said, I think it's the deal that generates investments and creates more investors than anything. And they're not thinking about any of the items I just named. So that property that is higher end, we like it as an investment. On the surface, when someone compares it to, a fourplex that cash flows really well, they say, I can make way more money over here. Okay. But for us, we're looking at mitigating loss, fewer issues with repairs, a higher quality tenant, less vacancy. And in the end, once you math all that in there, you look up and you say, wow. One other thing about that, and this, I would imagine this is pretty common in other markets, but cash flow and appreciation are inversely proportionate here. So if I have a property that cash flows really, really well, I'm making my money monthly, which means that 5 years from now, I might be lucky to sell it for what I paid for it. I may sell it for less, but I made my money monthly. And so when we get into those higher priced properties, they don't cash flow as well. But most of the people that are our investors are not looking to take that cash flow every month and pay their bills with it. So they're looking at the appreciation. So over time, that property appreciates in value. That property has some back end return that is helping keep the return high. And there's a couple of great things about that. Again, one, it caters to the right tenant. And two, it's taxes. If you make money on cash flow every month, even if you don't need the money, then you're probably going to get taxed as ordinary income. Now, everybody can do their taxes a certain way, but that immediate cash flow, if you're realizing it, gets taxed as ordinary income, which for a lot of people, a lot of our clients, is a pretty high tax bracket. So if you don't need that or you're highly sensitive to taxes, you might want to make any money per month, but I want it all in appreciation. And I'll realize my money 5 years from now. Well, I can 1031 exchange and defer that, or I can realize it then. Well, long-term capital gains, which is real estate that's owned for more than 12 months, is a much lower tax bracket than ordinary income. So when we do meet with an investor, they usually come in the door thinking one thing. And then when we ask them a handful of very basic questions, do you need the money every month? What's your sensitivity to tax? Let's start with those two. And based on those two answers, quite often we say, you know what? You might do better with a higher end property. It doesn't make as much cash flow, but it appreciates well. And you have the ability to defer that tax when it does come about. So I guess in that regard, it is a good investment. Looking at it a little bit differently than how a lot of people might, but it makes sense to our clients.
Yeah, I would say that's significantly different than most people look at those. It's funny that you say that. My parents do residential. My mom about 15 years ago got into residential real estate, and they bought some properties in some what I now recognize as high demand premium areas. And when they bought them, I remember they had in some of them cash flows of like $200 a month, $150 a month. I'm like, that is not worth the time that you're putting into it. And all of those properties that they own within 15 years, not only have the rents now gone up to where that cash flow is significantly more,
Right.
but almost every one of those properties has at least doubled in value in 15 years. Some of them even more than that. And so those ended up being, and to your point, almost no vacancy. I mean, they have a line of people waiting to lease these things when they come available. And so they almost never have, even a month of vacancy, which is, you're right. I mean, even at a few $100s a month cash flow, it takes a long time to make up a month of vacancy on that deal. So that's interesting.
Yeah, what you discovered is the same thing that we did. It wasn't by design. You look up who've owned units that perform certain ways, and you think that one is doing better than the other until you go and sell them both, because you really don't know how well the investment has performed until you're done with it. I can think that it's worth a certain value or it makes a certain cash flow, but money in, money out. So the investment starts when all my money goes into it. When I buy it, fix it, take vacancy on it, make rents on it. But when all my money comes out, when I've disposed of the property, that's when I can actually do the math and calculate it. And you're able to see then, wow, you go and sit at a closing, you see the check that someone gets from the sale of a property that was really held up on appreciation. And it shouldn't be just on that. But know that when you venture into the properties that we fool with, that is a key number. And they absolutely love it. They being our client.
Right. I would imagine. Well, so I did want to ask you, what do you see? I know I'm seeing there's a lot of disruptors in the market these days with, Zillow now buying properties and directly from sellers and things like that. I'm sure there's a lot of, you have like brokerages like Redfin that are, that charge almost no fees on the seller side. What do you see as the future with those disruptors? How do you see it changing?
Yeah, well, it's going to change the role of the individual agent for sure. It's going to largely reduce that role, and it will largely impact the commission dollars made by those agents and by those brokerages. So I would imagine there already has been quite a bit of change in the brokerage model. So you've got the online buyers, like you mentioned, and in the end, Josh, what it amounts to is the ease and efficiency of a transaction for the client, and they're going to go that direction. And if that is being provided through an online platform, they're going to go this direction. This has happened with automobiles. Everything you can think of is going this direction. And so I do think that is going to disrupt the traditional real estate agent who has largely generated their business from traditional means, meaning just regular lead generation, advertising, client follow-up, and so forth. I think they'll be impacted the most unless there's some way to partner with those online platforms. I personally look at that and I think this is where my diversity comes in, because I can shift my business and go and capture 20 more property investors, add 40 or 50 more properties, another $100,000 a month in rents. And then when we look at the leads that we develop in-house from those, the monthly recurring income that we make, the renewals that we make, the leasing fees that we make, it still builds that. If some disruptor came into that arena, we would have to do the same. We would find out where we're going to go. So I already see it. I think COVID has given us something to deal with in terms of learning how to be more efficient in our transaction process. I think these online platforms are going to force us to do the same. Why something should be take so long or have 20 or 30 steps to it, and there's an online option that is really abbreviated in terms of time and nets me the same dollars. It's on the buyer side too, Josh. So the main role of a real estate agent has been for years information. We're pretty well the gatekeepers to the information. So if someone needed, some market history and so forth, these online platforms have the ability to fill data from a lot of public information that's out there. So, someone goes to Zillow and they can see the same market history. They can see the last sale that took place, price reductions, the tax bill, what school district it is. I mean, all the things that agents previously would provide, we're just now unlocking the house. And if an buying or selling platform, eliminates that and can give access to the home, which they can, then where's the agent fit in that? So you better find out what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So that is coming. That is here. That is definitely here. So.
Well, it seems like the strategies that you're teaching are ways to insulate against that. I mean, if you have different avenues to generate income on the leasing side, and I know certainly on the commercial side, there's a lot more moving parts in that, that you can stay successful in that. And probably if you're learning it when you're coming into the business, like you're teaching, then you're better at it by the time all of this gets to, all of this peaks. So that's interesting. So are you, I know we talked about this a little bit. Have you thought about putting the training course? You don't do any coaching. Do you do any coaching of like agents? Like if an agent called you from San Diego or something and wanted to do coaching with you, do you do any of that?
No, I haven't. But it's a place I will likely go. I believe that what we have found to work will work certainly elsewhere. And so there's two ways for me to grow in that direction, where we might have an advantage the minute we walk into a market. I've identified some of those. And I actually have one of my agents who's anxious to try and launch one in another town. And so that's one way of doing it, just through duplicating what we already do. The other is to teach it. And I do feel like it's not a match for everybody. The mindset of someone has got to be very different. So I have plans of marketing that to that audience. I think that audience can be identified. I think that the product is certainly marketable and it's certainly valuable. And it is an approach that people will be looking for something different. As you indicated, these different disruptors are going to cause people to rethink how they do the business. And I think it's a perfect match, quite honestly. When someone is looking, it takes very little convincing for me to tell them that this is a way to do it, because they've been in the business, and you'll see them say, yeah, that's true. And I think that if they can just learn that. Another thing about it, Josh, I guess when it comes to training people with this, none of the skills are overly specific. The management and leasing component, very few people engage an agent there because of their expertise, their massive amount of knowledge. You're just there and willing to do it. And so I find that to be an advantage. It's a place for people who are really looking to work and build something.
So it's more from a convenience standpoint. So you just don't want to handle all of that. And so you can, well, I would imagine too, it's, if you're a tenant who's trying to get an agent to call them back and I mean, that's gotta be frustrating especially when you're trying to lease what in our market anyway is a high dollar property. You can't get anybody to show it to you. I mean, that's, that does seem, it's like it's untapped. It's funny that we've talked about this now for years. I mean, you and I, that we've known each other, and I still don't hear anybody else talking about this. And I'm sure there are, and I don't hear it, but it's it seems like such a brilliant strategy to approach it and to not have to deal with the frustration of calling somebody that 100 other people have called, and then that seller is frustrated because all these agents want to do is take their 5 or 6% and lock them up for 6 months or whatever. I mean, that's that's got to be exhausting for the 97th, 98th, 99 agents that's called that person too.
Right.
And you're getting shot down constantly.
No, I think that's true. And not that I don't want to give you my entire list of the reasons why I think this is the right direction, but I am going to give you a couple of more that are extremely unique, especially within the real estate world. You've been an agent, you understand this. The value of a business and succession planning as a business owner are two things that really don't exist in the traditional real estate world as I see it for the individual agent. Now, if you're a broker and you own an office and have multiple agents under contract and so forth, that's one thing. But for the individual producer, the day you stop selling is the day your commissions stop coming in. And so the business has no value to it. I started doing property management after one of my biggest years as a producer. Frankly, I got a little depressed. I looked back at the year and I thought, man, that was amazing. I was able to do that. I never thought I would have made this in anything. But now I got to go do it again. And how is it that a business that made this amount of money, my production made this amount of money, isn't worth a dime? I can't sell it to anybody. And I got very down about it. And so I said, I'm going to come up with a different plan. And so if I'm just going to use easy numbers, if you have 50 or 60 properties that range from $1,500 to $2,000, and you calculate leasing fees and the number of leases that actually renew, and we charge renewal fees, and I have a whole training module on how to charge, what to charge, and when to charge. And you collect monthly management fees. And so let's say you have a $10,000 a month of recurring income from that. The business the work that you do every month ends up being far less than that you would do to make $10,000 in commissions, as far as I'm concerned, because it's very systems based. It's online payments, online statements, a lot of online stuff. And so you have that. Well, if I have that in place and it's not overly specific to me, it's my business model, I can sell that to you. That business has value. And so, I don't know, we're talking about investors and cash flows. What would an investor pay for a $10,000 a month recurring revenue? What would they pay for that? There's a value. There's obviously a lot of methods for calculating that business, but that business can be sold. So I now have an exit strategy that, hey, I want to take my $120,000 a year of recurring revenue. It doesn't count the commissions we make from selling properties to those investors or selling properties to those tenants, but just what we have on the books now. What is that worth on the open market? I'll give you my systems. I'll train you on how to do it. It's worth a number. And it's an exit strategy in the event that an agent wants to spend 10, 15, or 20 years in the business, but not look up and say, wow, the day I stop selling is the day my income stops. So there is a business value there. There also is a succession plan to that. I don't have to sell it to keep making money from it. I can staff it and go on and help fund a retirement from that. And so if something happens to me, can my family still make an income? Can we still pay the rent at my office and staff? In the event that something happens. I'm going to use COVID as an example. If we didn't sell any properties during COVID-19, we still are going to be here because we have a foundational income that's not based on my production or some other agent's production. If our market shuts down, which a lot of things seem to think that, we still can make it. So that all of that points to, just to me, more reasons why it's attractive and why it's different, and why the crowd of people all rush one direction. I'm likely to just go the other. So
Yeah, man, that's interesting. I hadn't considered all those things. So less time intensive once you get it up and running, potential recurring revenue, which agents don't really have, and then potential for value on the back end if you wanted to sell the business.
sure.
Man, I don't talk to any agents that see this in the future out of being an agent and going to the property management side.
It's a different route, man. It's a completely different route. And I think that if you were lured into becoming a real estate agent based on large deals, massive commission dollars, you have this huge month as a producer. You can't imagine doing anything else until you have months that aren't so massive, and you think, I need something more durable than this.
Yeah.
So durability within business typically is lead generation to conversion and a certain number of listings, a certain number of transactions. It's all transaction based. And I did that for a long time. This is different. And I just don't, I welcome the diversity that it allows me to make money from. So, I won't go through all of them, but our streams of income from this, we make income on application fees, some property make readies, renewal fees, leasing fees, monthly management fees, commissions for selling a property to a tenant, commissions for adding an investment property to an investor. So you have all of these places that feed you multiple streams of income, which is just a fundamental investment strategy or business strategy that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's cool, man. Well, so if you're an agent, and you're listening to this, I'm working on getting Rory to put his course for sale. Yeah, I don't think I have him convinced yet, but I think it's just internal right now. But if he decides to do that, then in the notes to this, or the show notes, I'll put the link to it if he ever wants to do that. But
I appreciate it.
yeah, man. Well, we've been going for a good bit now. I'm not sure what time we're on, but I definitely appreciate you coming on, man. This was fun. I enjoyed it for my first guest on a podcast. This was really cool.
Good, man. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. And if you want to if you want to have your contact information, the notes, I can do all of that, and to where people, if they want to reach out and find you, that we can definitely do that. Was there anything that you wanted to get to that we didn't talk about? I feel like we covered some really good stuff.
I always enjoy visiting with you. I think that it's the questions you're asking are the right questions for anyone in the business, particularly right now. And and it forces me to talk through and to think of those answers, and probably creates some action steps for me just for having this interview. So I appreciate you prompting me to that. Keep me sharp, keep me on my toes.
Yeah, man. Well, when we do, we'll have to do it again and talk more about the Krav Maga and all of that, because we didn't dive into that too much.
We'll deviate totally from real estate and do nothing but self-defense.
There you go, man. Well, Rory, thanks again, man. I definitely appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you later.